Hello there, and welcome to this quiet episode of Boring History. Tonight, we're turning our attention to a civilization built on sand, stone, and silence. A place where kings were gods, time moved with the sun, and eternity was not a hope, but an expectation. For over 3,000 years, the Pharaohs ruled the Nile. Their images still gaze at us from crumbling walls and golden masks. But beneath the crowns and carvings lies something far more tangled, a life of strict ritual, heavy superstition, and relentless duty. If you've ever wondered what it meant to be the most powerful person in the ancient world, and what it cost, this may be a good night to find out. Let's begin. Under the fading stars, as the last breath of night clings to the cool stones of the palace, the pharaoh begins his day. Not by choice, but by rhythm. There is no sleeping in, no stretching limbs in silence. The first light has not yet broken the horizon, but already the sounds have begun. The muted padding of servants' feet on polished floors, the soft splash of water being drawn into ceremonial basins, the faint hum of a distant chant, barely audible but utterly constant. The pharaoh does not wake like other men. He is not allowed to. His awakening is part of a larger machine, a sacred mechanism that must be maintained daily without fail. The exact moment of rousing is determined by priests and astronomers, timed with the rise of the morning star or the sliver of the sun's return. The air in the royal chamber is heavy with incense, and even before his eyes open, the pharaoh's body is being prepared to rise, as it must, as it always has. For a god-king, sleep is not rest, it is interruption. There is no speech, no casual murmur, only the measured pace of hands that have repeated this ritual every morning since the day of coronation. First, the linens are removed, not simply bed sheets, but offerings in themselves, woven with care, stored with ceremony, replaced each night according to astrological dictates. Then the ceremonial fan-bearers step forward, wafting perfumed air in slow, symmetrical arcs. Nothing moves quickly here. Nothing happens by accident. The room is lit only by flame, oil lamps tended through the night to ensure that darkness never fully returns to this sacred space. The scent is sharp, dry, holy. Every act is deliberate. Water is poured into a gold-rimmed basin as a chant begins outside the chamber. It is the same chant every day, a hymn to the rebirth of Ra, a signal to the living incarnation of Horus, that the world has begun again, and so must he. The servants do not speak to the pharaoh, and the pharaoh does not speak unless it is required. Even words have weight, and careless speech can unbalance the morning. Instead, gestures guide the process. The first drink of the day, water drawn from a sacred source, filtered through linen, stored overnight in sealed alabaster, is brought forth and offered. The pharaoh touches it to his lips, but does not drink. Not yet. First, the breath. 3 inhalations of incense smoke from a bundle of dried lotus and acacia. Then the water, cool and metallic with minerals, is accepted. He does not gulp, he sips. To drink greedily in the morning is to call chaos into the body. Even swallowing has ritual. The final step is rising. Not sitting up, but standing. And not unaided. 4 attendants, chosen for their symmetry and silence, lift and support the pharaoh into upright posture. He does not place his own feet on the floor. They are guided, one after the other, into gilded sandals that wait on lion skin mats. Only then, fully vertical, fully adorned in silence, does the day truly begin. To those outside the palace, it might seem strange, the fuss, the strictness, the weight behind every movement. But to the men and women within these walls, it is not strange at all. It is necessary. The Pharaoh's life is not his own. His breath is the kingdom's breath. His balance the kingdom's balance. If he stumbles, the Nile may fail to flood. If he falters in speech, crops may wither. If he oversleeps, the stars themselves may shift. That is the burden of being not just ruler, but axis, the center around which every other life must turn. Even the birds that sing outside his chamber in the pre-dawn glow are not merely birds. They are omens, watched carefully by temple scribes who stand beyond the threshold, recording patterns of flight and cry. The sky must be read before he steps into it. For now, the chamber remains a world unto itself, soft with silence, thick with scent, filled with shadows that will soon burn away. And at the center of it, upright now, wrapped in linen and ritual, stands a man who is not allowed to be only a man. The journey from sleep to full awakening does not end with rising. For the Pharaoh, standing is not enough. He must be made clean, not in the common sense, but in the sacred one. His body, having passed through the silence of night, must now be purified for the day ahead. This is no ordinary bath. There is no tub, no casual wash of water. Instead, there is a stone basin carved from alabaster, its surface cool and unyielding. Water is poured slowly from jugs held by attendants, collected earlier from sacred sources, sometimes even the Nile itself, though only from stretches considered ritually pure. The Pharaoh does not bathe himself. That task belongs to designated priests, chosen not for strength or speed, but for ritual purity. Their movements are rehearsed, almost dreamlike. First the feet, then the hands, then the crown of the head. The order must never vary. To wash in the wrong sequence would offend the gods and draw misfortune onto the realm. The water is infused with herbs, crushed lotus petals, myrrh, and slivers of cedar bark. Each element holds meaning. Lotus for rebirth, myrrh for divine protection, cedar for permanence. As the water trickles down the Pharaoh's limbs, it carries with it not only dust or sleep, but any spiritual residue from the day before. The priests murmur phrases from memory, fragments of hymns meant to realign the soul. No part of the Pharaoh's body is treated casually. The shoulders are washed to prepare for the weight of rule. The hands are rinsed to cleanse the power of command. Even the ears are touched with soaked cloth, as if to improve the hearing of divine messages. It is not meant to be relaxing. It is meant to be correct. Every drop of water, every gesture of the cloth, is a negotiation with the unseen. The Pharaoh stands motionless throughout, neither flinching from the chill nor sighing with relief. His stillness is part of the ritual. To be moved by comfort is to be too human. Once the washing is complete, the Pharaoh is not dried by friction, but by air. Large palm frond fans, held aloft by servants in perfect formation, sway back and forth in steady rhythm. The breeze they create is scented. Smoke from sandalwood and cinnamon carried into the chamber from censers stationed at the cardinal points. It is not the drying that matters, but the preparation for the next step, the anointing. Oils are presented in small alabaster jars, each bearing a seal carved with protective signs. These oils are not just perfume, they are offerings in liquid form. Frankincense is used for clarity, juniper for strength, bitter almond for protection. The priests dip their fingers into each jar with careful reverence, then press the substance into the pharaoh's skin. Shoulders, neck, wrists, behind the knees, across the chest. Each place chosen with intention, each stroke of oil accompanied by silent breath and lowered eyes. The scent begins to gather in the air, sweet and sharp, dizzying in its density. The face is treated last. A fine powder of crushed malachite is mixed with oil and applied beneath the eyes in long, smooth lines. This is not for beauty, though the result is striking. It is protection against glare, against illness, against malevolent spirits. The green is sacred, linked to the god Wadjet, and its presence around the eyes is a kind of shield. Then comes the kohl, a black paste made from galena stone, drawn with precision along the lashes. This too is holy. The eyes of the pharaoh must mirror those of the hawk, ever watchful, ever guarded. When the final touches are made, a dab of scented resin at the temples, a fine dusting of gold powder along the jawline, the transformation is complete. He is no longer a man who slept and woke. He is now something other. Not simply adorned, but consecrated. The human beneath has been wrapped in the symbols and scents of divinity, prepared not for comfort, but for function. What stands at the end of this process is not a ruler dressing for the day, but a living God, assembled piece by sacred piece ready to be seen. The garments of the pharaoh are not chosen. They are prescribed, laid out in precise order by attendants who have memorized the protocol down to the smallest fold. Nothing is selected for fashion or comfort. Each thread, each color, each ornament carries weight, not just symbolic, but spiritual. The first layer is linen, always linen, woven from flax harvested at a specific time of year, under specific celestial conditions. The fabric is bleached to a purity that reflects not only cleanliness, but cosmic alignment. The undergarment, soft and tightly wrapped, binds the body into sacred shape. Over it, a finely pleated kilt, wrapped left over right, secured by a golden sash adorned with protective symbols, ankhs, scarabs, cobras. Even the knot has meaning. A loose knot may suggest weakness, a too tight knot, aggression. The perfect tension must be achieved, a reminder that even restraint is calculated. After the linen, the jewelry begins. The collar comes first, wide, heavy, layered with carnelian, turquoise, lapis lazuli, and rows of gold beads. Each stone chosen not for beauty, but for function. Carnelian for courage, turquoise for rebirth, lapis for wisdom. The collar rests high on the shoulders, not falling naturally, but held in place with stiff backing. Its purpose is not to drape, but to radiate. Next come the bracelets and armlets, placed with measured symmetry. Right wrist, then left. Right forearm, then left. A ring is slid onto the middle finger, not for status, but to complete the circuit of symbols encircling the body. Everything gleams in the soft morning light, but it is not meant to catch the eye. It is meant to blind misfortune. Every edge is smoothed, every surface polished, not to please the wearer, but to satisfy the gods. For the pharaoh is not dressing to be admired. He is dressing to be obeyed. And then the crown. Or perhaps not just one. There are many crowns, each for a different mood of rule, each for a different setting. The white crown of Upper Egypt, tall and curved. The red crown of Lower Egypt, flat and ridged. The double crown, the the pshent, a fusion of both, symbolizing unity. But even that may be layered with a nemas headdress, striped linen falling to the shoulders, familiar from statues and tombs, meant to convey balance and permanence. Sometimes a vulture or a cobra, wrought in gold, is affixed to the brow. The uraeus. It does not merely decorate, it watches, it protects, it threatens. To look upon the pharaoh's face and see that serpent poised to strike is to remember one's place. It is not the eyes that inspire fear, but the shadow of what sits above them. This is not mere regalia, it is armament. The pharaoh is not only a king, he is a symbol of cosmic law, walking, breathing, and armed with divine terror. Finally, the emblems of power are placed in his hands, the crook and flail, one curved, one straight, one for guidance, one for punishment. They are not carried for show, but for function. To be seen holding them is to remind the kingdom that every shepherd must also carry a whip. The pharaoh does not wave them. He holds them crossed against his chest, a silent declaration of duality. Mercy and might, nurture and wrath. Together with the scepter, the ankh, the seal rings, the staffs of office, he is encased in meaning, weighed down by centuries of expectation. No piece of this attire can be removed without consequence. No item is optional. To appear without the full assembly is to appear diminished, unwhole, vulnerable. And so, each morning, the full weight is donned again. Not for vanity, not for comfort, not even for tradition, but because without these symbols, the man beneath would simply be a man. And the world cannot afford for its God to be mistaken for one of them. The palace may be vast and gleaming, but it is not the center of the pharaoh's mourning. That honor belongs to the temple. Not a place of private worship, but a sacred engine meant to keep the universe from unraveling. As the sun rises over the horizon, the king steps away from the mortal world and into something older, colder, and much more exacting. The temple courtyard is still, empty except for the rustle of linen and the hush of sand beneath sandals. The high priests wait in formation, eyes lowered, hands pressed flat in reverence. No words are spoken. They are not needed. Everyone knows what is required. The rituals are as old as the walls themselves, carved into every column and echoed in every shadow. The pharaoh walks forward without hesitation, his path already mapped by 1,000 years of steps before him. The inner sanctuary is dark, colder than the air outside, its silence broken only by the flick of flame and the rustle of incense smoke curling toward the ceiling. The god resides here, not in flesh, but in form. A statue, sealed behind a gilded door, hidden from all eyes except two, the high priest and the living god of Egypt. That door is opened now, slowly, carefully, as if the stone itself might object. Within, the figure of the deity waits in stillness, carved in stone or cast in metal, adorned with amulets, its face calm, unknowable. The pharaoh approaches. This is not worship as modern ears might imagine it. There is no plea, no confession. There is only offering. The king brings gifts, baskets of bread, jugs of wine, cones of unguent, bolts of cloth, live geese, figs, garlic, carved tokens. All are placed one by one at the feet of the statue, not to please the god, but to fulfill the covenant. The offerings are not generosity, they are maintenance. Without them, balance falters. As each item is laid down, a prayer is spoken, not improvised, but memorized, precise, fixed in rhythm and tone. The words are not meant to persuade, but to affirm. The world is still in order, the sun has risen, and Egypt continues. The pharaoh bows not in humility, but in synchronization, aligning his body with the will of the gods. He sprinkles water, he burns incense, he pours milk and beer into carved basins, each act corresponding to a cosmic force, each movement echoed by the priests at a distance. To outsiders it may look theatrical, but to those within these sacred walls, it is a performance of necessity. The gods do not require belief, they require process. If the rite is broken, if the offering is incomplete, the words mispronounced, the sequence disturbed, the punishment may be famine, plague, or war. This is not theater. This is survival, dressed in gold and silence. Once the rituals are complete, the statue is closed behind its door again, concealed from the mortal eye until the next day. The sanctuary is swept, the offerings catalogued, and the incense ash gathered in sacred bowls to be buried or redistributed to lesser shrines. The pharaoh turns, not hurriedly, but with measured grace. The ritual has ended, but its weight will remain. His presence has renewed the divine contract between Egypt and the unseen forces that govern it. Without him, there is no protection. Without his offerings, the cycle halts. Outside the temple, the sun is climbing higher. Farmers are tending fields, scribes are recording transactions, children are chasing birds through alleys. None of them will see the god's statue or know what was whispered in the dark. But they will eat and sleep and live, because the pharaoh has stood before the divine and done what must be done to hold the cosmos together for one more day. By the time the offerings have been made and the temple doors sealed once more, the rhythms of the palace have shifted. The divine has been acknowledged, and now the mortal world demands attention. The pharaoh does not return to his private chambers, nor to rest or wander. He moves instead to the audience hall, vast, columned, and deliberately cold. Here, beneath painted ceilings and watchful statues, rulership takes its visible form. His throne, placed on a raised dais, is not merely a seat. It is a symbol carved from rare wood and overlaid with gold, guarded by the emblems of gods and beasts. To ascend, it is not a casual gesture. It is a confirmation. The man who sits here does not ask questions. He answers them. He does not wonder what should be done. He decides. Courtiers, advisors, generals, scribes, they do not enter all at once. They wait in order, in silence, in full awareness that each step forward brings them into the presence of power made flesh. The first to speak is always the vizier, the pharaoh's eyes and voice in matters too minor to demand divine attention. He presents reports, harvest projections, tax receipts, border patrols, unresolved legal disputes. Nothing is spoken freely. Every phrase is shaped in formality. May the ears of the good God be open. May the words of truth please the throne. The pharaoh listens. Sometimes he responds with a gesture. Sometimes he speaks, his voice quiet but final. A dispute over farmland in the delta ruled. A conflict between temples over grain rights settled. A request for labor to rebuild a collapsed bridge, granted or denied, depending not on whim, but on alignment with Ma'at. For while the pharaoh may act with total authority, he does not claim chaos. His duty is not just to govern, but to maintain cosmic balance. Justice is not what he prefers. Justice is what he embodies. To defy him is to disturb the universe itself. Petitioners arrive next, commoners escorted in by scribes. Their knees touch stone, their eyes stay low. A man claims his neighbor poisoned his goats. A widow asks for land promised by her husband's dying words. A priest appeals a tax levied on his district. They speak only when permitted. The pharaoh considers not only their words, but their posture, their tone, the weight of their sincerity. In some cases, he hands down decisions on the spot, a gesture to a scribe, a single sentence spoken with deliberate slowness. In others, he asks questions no one expected. When did the floodwaters last rise near their homes? Who owns the papyrus marshes nearby? Answers are recorded, not to archive the moment, but to shape the outcome. The final verdict, whether spoken softly or inscribed in public record, becomes law. Not because it was debated, but because it came from him. To rule is not to argue, it is to declare. Throughout the day, others come and go. Generals requesting orders, architects unveiling plans for new temples, foreign envoys presenting tokens and letters from distant rulers, a lapis bowl from Babylon, a leopard skin from Nubia, a letter addressed not to a man, but to a son on earth. The pharaoh may acknowledge these gestures with a nod, or simply let them be carried away without response. He does not need to be gracious. He needs only to be unmoved. This hall is not a place of persuasion. It is a place where the lines between state, law, and divinity converge. And as the sun crosses its highest point in the sky, the audience begins to thin. Those who have spoken return to their tasks. Those still waiting understand they may not be seen. The throne room empties not with haste, but with reverence. For the man who remains seated beneath painted vultures and winged suns is not merely deciding matters of grain, stone, and speech. He is sustaining an empire by the weight of his silence and the shape of his words. Not every moment of the pharaoh's day is spent behind stone walls and heavy doors. For all his silence and seclusion, he must still be seen. The people, distant and nameless though they may be, must be reminded. Reminded of power, of presence, of divine authority wrapped in flesh. And so the procession begins. It is not spontaneous. It is scheduled, rehearsed, and layered in precision. The route is known in advance, cleared of obstruction, lined with banners and censers. At its center is the pharaoh himself, standing tall in a gilded chariot, drawn by white-plumed horses whose harnesses are adorned with polished bronze and embroidered linen. His garments are brighter now, his jewelry heavier. The double crown glints in the sun, catching the eyes of everyone who dares raise their gaze. This is not a journey. It is a statement. He is not merely traveling. He is demonstrating the order of the world. The crowd does not press close. That would be unthinkable. Instead, they form two long rivers of humanity flowing back from the avenue's edges, faces tilted upward, arms raised in praise or supplication. They chant his name, not as a man, but as a god. Children are hoisted onto shoulders. Old men kneel in dust. Women scatter flowers or strips of colored cloth. Incense burns from high platforms on either side, curling upward in thick, fragrant spirals. Musicians accompany the movement. Drums, sistrums, long flutes. The rhythm is not festive, but solemn. The kind of music that makes the skin tingle and the breath slow. For many in the crowd, This is the only time they will ever see him. And though his face is distant, his outline glittering and almost unreal, it is enough. To witness the Pharaoh is to be reminded of one's place beneath the sky. Behind the chariot march the guards, tall, motionless even in motion, their spears gleaming, their sandals hitting the stones in perfect unison. Behind them come priests, swinging censers, and fan-bearers waving great palm fronds. Each figure in the procession has been chosen for their beauty, their silence, their symmetry. Nothing is left to chance. Even the animals, trained lions or leashed baboons, are part of the theater. The message is clear. Everything in this kingdom, from beasts to men, moves when the Pharaoh moves. The procession may pause at shrines or statues, where offerings are made, prayers whispered, and gifts left. Sometimes the Pharaoh dismounts, placing a symbolic brick or striking a golden peg into the ground to sanctify a future building. But always, the people watch. Always, the spectacle continues. Not for his amusement, for theirs. Because to see him radiant, remote, and surrounded by order is to believe, just for a moment, that the world itself is stable. And when it is over, when the avenue has emptied, and the music has faded, and the golden chariot has disappeared into the palace gates, the silence that follows is not disappointment. It is awe. The dust settles slowly. People speak in hushed tones. Children are shushed. A glimpse was enough. The image will remain. The towering presence, the gleam of metal and stone, the certainty of a figure too grand to question. That is the point. The Pharaoh does not need to issue decrees from the balcony or speak to the people in grand speeches. He only needs to be seen, at the right time, in the right light, surrounded by the trappings of perfection. His power is not hidden, it is paraded, because the divine must be witnessed to be believed. And belief, once ignited, does not easily fade. Even when the crowds are gone and the gold is laid to rest in its proper chest, the rituals do not end. If anything, they become more demanding in private, because the Pharaoh lives not just under the eye of his people, but under the constant scrutiny of the gods. And the gods, unlike the people, notice everything. A missed gesture, a reversed sequence, a single misstep can undo days of careful balance. And so he walks carefully, always with the right foot first, never the left. That simple motion, right before left, is a silent invocation of Ma'at, the principle of balance and truth. To reverse the order is to invite Isfet, chaos, into the day. Even rising from a chair has a script. One must place the right hand on the armrest, lift the head before the chest, stand slowly. To rush is to offend. To deviate is to risk. In a world held together by ritual, superstition becomes a form of survival. The path through the palace is never improvised. Certain hallways are avoided on specific days. Certain thresholds are crossed only during particular hours. Mirrors must never face the entrance, lest they reflect evil spirits inward. Water basins are stirred counterclockwise before use, to confuse malevolent forces. When the Pharaoh passes through doorways, his attendants clear the air ahead with fans and smoke, not for comfort, but for spiritual hygiene. Statues of deities are never looked at directly unless in ceremony. Even then, the Pharaoh's gaze must remain soft, unfocused, avoiding any suggestion of confrontation. If his shadow crosses the base of a god's image, it is considered a bad sign, one that must be corrected with incense, offering, or silence. The fear is not metaphorical. The fear is practical. The gods are not abstract ideas. They are present, potent, and easily provoked. Animals, too, carry meanings far beyond their form. A bird flying east before sunrise is a good omen. A beetle crawling across the path from left to right must not be disturbed. A snake found near the temple gate may require an entire day's schedule to be altered. Even dreams are suspect. If the pharaoh wakes remembering fire, teeth, or water rising too fast, the dream is interpreted by temple scribes, sometimes resulting in the delay of ceremonies or the redirection of processions. Priests trained in oniromancy keep scrolls of meanings, and their verdicts are not to be ignored. The pharaoh himself may say nothing, but his behavior will shift. A slightly different route taken, a specific amulet worn, an unplanned offering made at dawn. These adjustments are quiet, seamless, and constant. To live as a pharaoh is to live as a conduit. Every sign passing through the body, every gesture carrying weight beyond understanding. Even speech is a risk. Words once spoken cannot be taken back. Certain phrases are never said aloud. Names of enemies are erased from monuments to prevent their ghosts from finding rest. Curses are buried inside walls, sealed in clay, whispered into flame. The pharaoh is taught from childhood that language builds and destroys, that sound is a substance. When addressing priests or emissaries, he chooses his syllables carefully. No casual tones, no jokes, no uncontrolled laughter. To misspeak is to misalign the world. His attendants know this too. Their footsteps are measured. Their hands form gestures of respect. Even their breathing slows in his presence, lest they disrupt the atmosphere of sanctity. This is not paranoia. This is the architecture of belief, shaped over generations into something as solid as stone. The pharaoh may be surrounded by gold, by servants, by the silence of obedience, but beneath it all, he is surrounded most of all by rules, invisible, rigid, and endlessly watching. As the sun lowers and the palace walls begin to glow with the orange breath of evening, preparations shift from judgment to display. The feast awaits, not a simple meal, not a casual gathering, but a performance of presence. It is easy to imagine laughter, indulgence, or relaxation, but for the pharaoh, there is no such thing as a private dinner. The banquet is a continuation of rule, conducted with gold and silence instead of decrees. Guests do not sit uninvited. Their positions are determined by rank, by favor, by invisible threads of political gravity. The tables, low and wide, are arranged with geometric symmetry. Plates of roast fowl, glazed fruits, bread perfumed with coriander, and bowls of honeyed dates are set not just for nourishment, but for message. The abundance speaks not only of prosperity, but of control. Nothing here is excessive by accident. Everything that pleases the eye is also there to reinforce the structure of divine order. Music begins before the food is touched. Harps and flutes, soft drums, voices in a language older than memory. Musicians are not performers. They are functionaries of the sacred, invoking gods of joy and harmony. Dancers follow, slow, deliberate, measured in motion. Barefoot women in linen robes move through the chamber in time with the rhythm, their steps echoing symbols of fertility, grace, and plenty. The pharaoh watches, expression unchanged, not because he is unmoved, but because he must not be moved. To react too openly would shift the balance. To show too much pleasure would invite misinterpretation. His face is composed, his gestures minimal. A raised hand to signal more wine, a slight nod to acknowledge a particularly skilled movement. The room mirrors him. Laughter is soft, restrained. Voices remain low, as though in the presence of a sleeping lion. At certain points in the evening, specific rituals are observed. A toast, not merely of wine but of order, poured from a particular vessel, blessed with specific words, lifted first toward the gods, then to the gathered court. An offering is made to the memory of ancestors, a small bowl of beer poured onto the stone floor, evaporating into the air like a breath returned to the past. These moments are not interruptions. They are the spine of the evening, the reason the feast exists at all. Every gesture reminds those present that they dine not with a man, but with a god. Even the food itself, carefully chosen, bears meaning. Figs for sweetness in speech, duck for victory in war, garlic to ward off evil. What is eaten is never as important as why it is served. The menu is a scroll written in flavor and texture, and only the initiated can read it fully. As the night deepens, the atmosphere softens but never loosens. Servants continue to move with precision. No clatter, no spills. Even fatigue is forbidden to show. The pharaoh may smile, once perhaps, and this is enough to send a ripple through the room. Conversation may occur, but only in measured tones and only with those permitted by protocol. No guest addresses the pharaoh without invitation. No question is asked of him directly. His presence is a sun, and all other lights orbit in quiet obedience. When the feast concludes, it does so not with applause or sudden rising, but with a slow fading of motion. The music dims. The dancers withdraw. Plates are cleared like remnants of a dream. The guests, now marked by the blessing of participation, bow as they depart. And the pharaoh, having played his part in this sacred display of abundance and discipline, returns to the inner chambers, not fuller in stomach, but confirmed in stature. For in Egypt, even joy is ceremony, even pleasure, a form of rule. Even in the quietest hours, when the palace dims and the corridors fall silent beneath the flicker of oil lamps, the thoughts of the pharaoh do not rest. They drift not toward tomorrow's duties or past victories, but toward something deeper, more permanent, and far more uncertain. Death. Not the moment of dying, but everything that must follow. For a man called a god, mortality is not denial, it is delay. And that delay must be planned with obsessive precision. The afterlife is not guaranteed, even for the king. It must be prepared, defended, and constructed stone by stone. Long before his body begins to fail, his tomb is already rising somewhere in the desert. He has visited its site, spoken with architects and priests, approved scrolls of design that speak not of style, but of function. This is not a monument. This is survival, and there is no room for error. The tomb is not merely a chamber carved into stone. It is a world within the world, built to outlast sand, flood, and time itself. Each hallway must align with sacred geometry. Each wall must bear spells, prayers, and scenes from his life, not to honor memory, but to guide the soul. Without these inscriptions, the journey through the Duat, the perilous underworld, cannot begin. Every slab of stone, every pigment used, is chosen for magical resonance. dark blue ceilings with golden stars to mirror the night sky, images of gods bearing ankhs and knives, trials, thresholds, boats, serpents, doors. The tomb becomes a script, a labyrinth, a code written in architecture. Servants assigned to its construction work in silence, sworn to secrecy, for if the location becomes known too early, tomb robbers may one day steal not just gold, but eternity. What lies inside is not treasure, it is defense. Alongside the stonework, the collection of grave goods begins. A slow accumulation of the necessities for the life to come. Furniture, sandals, food jars, weapons, amulets, linens, perfumes, statues. All must be replicated in duplicate, sometimes triplicate, because in the field of reeds, the pharaoh must lack nothing. Even servants are prepared, first as real individuals and later as small figurines, shabtis, meant to come alive and labor in his name. The rituals surrounding death are rehearsed long before the final breath. Priests are trained to speak his name, to recite the right passages at the right hour. Copies of the Book of the Dead are written and checked, the pages folded and stored. Even the heart, destined to be weighed against a feather in the Hall of Judgment, is given its own spell of protection, a prayer that it not betray the deeds of the flesh. Every aspect of the afterlife is documented, but no part is certain. That is what haunts the king. For all his power, for all the gold and ritual that fill his waking hours, the pharaoh fears what cannot be ruled. The silence after death, the darkness between stars, the possibility that something, somewhere, was forgotten, that a name was misspelled, a wall left bare, a seal placed backwards. He fears the gods will find him lacking, or worse, that the gods will not find him at all. And so the tomb becomes his second life, carefully built while the first is still in motion. It is the only place where he will dwell longer than his palace, the only chamber that must never be seen by light again. As the years pass, he may visit it in secret, watch the stone deepen, the corridors stretch, the painter's work in near darkness. He says nothing, but his presence shapes every decision. Because when his final breath leaves him, what remains must not be memory. It must be permanence. The body will be wrapped, the name spoken, the tomb sealed. And beyond that, only the gods will know if the work was enough. Behind the smooth stone walls and polished courtyards, behind the columns that shimmer with light and silence, the royal palace breathes in whispers. Not all power comes from decree or divinity. Some of it coils in shadows, soft, slow, and patient. The pharaoh may wear the crown, but inside the palace there are many who watch, listen, and wait. Queens, concubines, sons, daughters, stewards, eunuchs, scribes, each with their own loyalties, secrets, and ambitions. No voice is raised in accusation, but no room is without an ear. A single glance over a shared bowl of pomegranates may carry the weight of a threat. A misplaced word in a hallway may echo for days. Every gesture is calculated. Every silence holds meaning. Because here, within these walls, survival is not about service. It is about position and proximities to the throne. The great wife, the official queen, holds court in her own wing, surrounded by handmaidens who sleep lightly and speak rarely. She oversees matters of lineage, of tradition, of appearance. But even she must remain watchful. For the pharaoh has other wives, lesser in title but not always in influence. A favored concubine, if she bears a strong son, can shift the weight of succession. A clever daughter, if married into the right priesthood, can anchor a dynasty. Jealousies are inevitable, but rarely open. Instead, gifts are exchanged with too much generosity. Compliments are too polished. Illnesses appear without cause. A favorite servant vanishes. A new one appears with different eyes. And through it all, the pharaoh remains distant, not unaware but untouchable. To intervene is to expose the nest. Better to let it writhe quietly, so long as the snakes do not leave their box. The children, too, are raised within this delicate balance. Sons trained in the art of governance, warfare, or temple ritual, all depending on their mother's rank and the pharaoh's shifting favor. Daughters, often more astute than their brothers, are bartered in marriage or placed strategically in priesthoods. They learn quickly what can be spoken and what must be merely understood. Alliances form in playrooms, in shared tutors, in long walks through private gardens. But innocence is a thin veil. Each child knows who their mother is and what that means. And somewhere, quiet and constant, looms the question of succession. It is not discussed openly. That would be dangerous. But it breathes under every ceremonial robe and echoes through every festival where one prince stands slightly closer to the pharaoh than the others. Even the gods must sense it, that invisible pull toward inheritance and the violence it often brings. Servants and stewards complete the web, their loyalty bought not with gold, but with secrets. The one who brings food to the queen also hears her weep behind closed doors. The one who dresses the prince may one day carry a message meant to shift the future. Every errand carries a double meaning. Every silence is a negotiation. Rumors do not die here. They are fed, pruned, and passed along like sacred scrolls. Occasionally, someone vanishes. A maid falls ill. A guard is reassigned. It is not spoken of. The palace heals over the wound, but never forgets. And so the pharaoh, who bears the burden of gods and empires, must also walk among his own blood and flesh with the caution of a priest among serpents. He smiles, he nods, he blesses, but in the dark, he listens. Because to rule Egypt is not only to face the desert, the flood, the enemy. It is to sleep inside a labyrinth of quiet teeth, and to wake knowing that love, loyalty, and death often wear the same face. The crown of Egypt does not pass gently from one hand to the next. It is not a simple inheritance, sealed by blood and ceremony. For a pharaoh, succession is a battlefield, one waged not with spears and armies, but with whispers, alliances, and the slow poison of ambition. Though the official line may claim divine descent, the truth inside the palace is more fragile. Many sons are born, but not all are equal. Some from queens, some from concubines, some acknowledged publicly, others kept in shadow. Each one carries a portion of hope and a portion of threat. The future throne is never empty. It is surrounded. And as the current pharaoh ages, the edges of loyalty begin to fray. Smiles sharpen, gifts multiply. Servants choose their glances more carefully. A gesture of affection between father and one particular son may echo louder than any decree. Among the princes, nothing is spoken aloud, but everything is understood. The eldest does not always inherit. The strongest is not always favored. Proximity, timing, and maternal influence weigh more than skill. A son whose mother is in decline may find himself isolated, his tutors reassigned, his guards replaced. Another, younger but born of a more favored wife, might begin to appear beside the pharaoh during festivals, receiving the symbols of divine favor, the crook and flail, the sacred kiss on the forehead. These gestures, though symbolic, are powerful, and their meaning is not lost on the others. Rivalries form early, long before any death. Brothers become spies. Games become contests of memory, language, charm. One forgets a name on purpose. Another offers a gesture just slightly out of turn. Small things, but in a court where every breath is ritual, they carry weight. When tensions rise, accidents follow. A falcon tumbles from the prince's wrist during a public hunt. A goblet brings illness to a visiting cousin. A favored tutor is found face down in the Nile. Nothing is ever proven. Grief is expressed. Rituals are observed. But no one truly believes in coincidence. Behind the marble columns and perfumed corridors, there are meetings in private courtyards, scrolls passed in silence, alliances formed not out of love, but out of need. Sometimes a son will seek favor with the priesthood, offering gifts or temple lands in exchange for prophecy. Others try to win over the military, appealing to commanders who remember their training, their bravery in youth. And all the while the pharaoh watches. He does not intervene hastily. To name a successor too soon invites danger. To delay too long invites chaos. His silence is not indecision. It is a test. In rare moments of honesty, perhaps the pharaoh wonders if any choice will ensure peace. Even a clear successor, if too ambitious, may bring war to the throne room. Even a humble son, if too weak, may open the door to rebellion. The gods offer signs, but never certainty. And so the struggle continues, day after day, wrapped in ceremony, cloaked in respect. Sons bow to each other with perfect grace, but their eyes do not blink. Their hands, steady during prayers, twitch slightly when reaching for bread. And the future, that long shadow stretching beyond the pharaoh's life, remains clouded. No matter how tall the pyramids, no matter how golden the burial mask, no ruler ever truly rests easy. Because the living always hunger, and no bloodline, no blessing, no divine title can silence the will to rise. Not all who wore the crown of Egypt did so with a man's face. There were women, rare and unforgettable, who stepped beyond the roles assigned to them and claimed the throne for themselves. Not as queens beside kings, not as silent mothers of princes, but as rulers in their own right. The palace walls may have whispered, and the priests may have hesitated, but the gods, or at least the records, did not deny their power. These women did not merely survive the labyrinth of the court. They dominated it. They donned royal insignia, led ceremonies, issued decrees, and in some cases, even wore the false beard of kingship. Their names remain etched into the stone of temples, though often chipped away by those who came after. Because to rule as a woman was to provoke not only tradition, but the very idea of divine order. And yet, they did. Hatshepsut, perhaps the most formidable of them all, began as regent for a boy king too young to rule. But regency soon blurred into authority, and authority became reign. She did not claim power through rebellion. She absorbed it. Slowly, steadily, and with such grace that by the time her images appeared carved as a male pharaoh, It seemed not a contradiction, but a truth. She commissioned massive building projects, revived trade routes, and maintained peace during a time when Egypt often found war. Her temple at Deir el-Bahri still rises from the cliffs, like a whisper of divine ambition. She ruled not by hiding her femininity, but by wrapping it in the garments of kingship. And yet, after her death, her name was struck from monuments, her images defaced. It was not punishment, it was fear. Her legacy had become too real, too strong, too permanent. Then there was Nefertiti, often remembered for her beauty, but far more dangerous for her intellect. As the wife of Akhenaten, she stood not behind the throne but beside it, co-ruling during one of the most radical and controversial periods in Egyptian history. The worship of a single god, Aten, the sun disk, reshaped religious practice, art, and even architecture. Nefertiti's image appears in scenes once reserved for kings, performing offerings, smiting enemies, wearing crowns meant for men. And when Akhenaten vanished from the records, whether through death or erasure, some believe she may have ruled alone under a different name. The evidence is fractured, scattered, buried by those who restored the old ways. But the traces remain, enough to suggest that her reign did not end with her husband's, enough to unsettle those who believed power must always come with a deep voice and a broad shoulder. These women were not exceptions because they were women. They were exceptions because they succeeded. Egypt had seen wives with ambition, queens who plotted, mothers who advised. But Hatshepsut and Nefertiti stepped beyond those roles. They claimed the center, and in doing so, they threatened more than men. They threatened the story Egypt told itself about how the world should work. That is why their names were nearly lost. That is why their statues were buried, their images defiled, their histories rewritten. Yet even stone cannot fully forget. Their faces still look out from shattered temples and museum glass. Regal, composed, watchful. They remind us that in a world of rituals and rules, there was still room for disruption. Quiet, patient, and wrapped in linen, but disruption nonetheless. And perhaps that is the most divine act of all. Somewhere between the sun and the sand, a king turned his back on centuries of belief. He did not whisper his doubts or challenge the priests in secret. He declared it openly, boldly, as if the gods themselves had made a mistake. His name was Akhenaten, and he did what few dared even imagine. He rewrote the divine order. The many gods of Egypt, the crowded pantheon of animal-headed deities and ancient rituals, were swept aside. In their place, he raised a single god, Aten, the sun disk, radiant and impersonal, without form or face. Temples were closed, statues were smashed. Priests who served Amun, Osiris, and Thoth found themselves stripped of influence, silenced, or worse. What had been eternal was now forbidden. What had been truth was now heresy. And in this new world, only the sunlight was sacred. To embody this revolution, Akhenaten built a new city, Akhetaten, on land untouched by old temples and old gods. It rose swiftly from the desert, with wide avenues, open-air altars, and no shadowy sanctuaries. The king moved his court there, away from Thebes, away from tradition. In this city of light, art changed. The stiff, eternal poses of past rulers gave way to fluid, intimate scenes. The king was shown with his wife, with his children, with elongated limbs and heavy eyes. The sun's rays reached down like fingers, each ending in a small hand offering life. It was a world reimagined, softer, stranger, more human. And for a time, it held. The court followed. The scribes copied new prayers. The festivals honored a single, distant god. But beneath the golden surface, discontent smoldered. The people murmured. The priests plotted. The old gods were silent, but not gone. Outside Akhetaten, famine crept in. Trade weakened. The borders stirred with unrest. The temples that once held the nation together stood empty, and the rituals that soothed the people's fears were no longer spoken. Akhenaten, consumed by his vision, seemed unmoved. He appeared less in public, more in private devotion. His rule, once revolutionary, grew fragile, not in stone but in spirit. The people endured, but they did not understand. The sun might shine on everyone, but it could not hear their prayers. And when Akhenaten died, his name was not carried forward. His successors, perhaps his own children, perhaps his generals, moved quickly to restore what had been lost. The city was abandoned. The old gods returned. The new religion, once declared eternal, was erased with a speed that betrayed fear. In later records, Akhenaten was called a heretic, a madman, a failure. His statues were torn down, his name chiseled out, his god left nameless once more. And yet, the memory of his reign lingers, not only for its audacity, but for its isolation. He was a king who ruled not for the people, but for an idea. He sought purity, clarity, unity, and in doing so shattered what had endured for millennia. He believed himself chosen. Perhaps he was. But the gods of Egypt, layered in myth and blood, do not yield easily. And so Akhenaten remains a shadow, brilliant, strange, and alone, his sun forever burning in a sky that no longer belongs to him. The boy was barely 9 years old when he was crowned king. His name, once Tutankhaten, living image of Aten, was quickly changed to Tutankhamun, a signal to the nation that the heresy was over. The sun god Aten would no longer rule the heavens alone. The old gods, Amun, Osiris, Thoth, and the rest, returned, not quietly, but triumphantly. Temples reopened. Statues were rebuilt. The priests reclaimed their voices, their power, and their wealth. And at the center of this quiet restoration sat a child, fragile, uncertain, and controlled. He wore the crowns, said the prayers, and held the scepter, but the true weight of governance belonged to others. Viziers, generals, and temple officials spoke for him, guided his hand, arranged his days. He was a king, but only in name. And yet his reign mattered more than it seemed, not for what he did, but for what it ended. The court moved swiftly to undo Akhenaten's reforms. Decrees were issued in the boy king's name, declaring loyalty to the traditional gods. Akhetaten, the strange sun city, was abandoned, its stones left to the sand and silence. The royal family shifted back to Thebes and Memphis, and the religious order that had ruled Egypt for centuries was restored. For the people, it was not just politics. It was stability, familiarity, a return to the rhythms that shaped their lives. The gods, once silenced, were given voices again. Festivals resumed. Offerings burned. Hymns rose once more over temple rooftops. And through it all, the young Tutankhamun smiled from painted walls and golden shrines, his image carefully crafted to show strength, divinity, and peace. But behind the paint, he remained a boy. one with a curved spine, a clubbed foot, and a body already breaking beneath the burdens of rule and inheritance. Tutankhamun's reign was short. By the time he was 18 or 19, he was dead, likely from illness, perhaps complicated by injury, disease, or inherited weakness. His death brought no war, no dramatic collapse, but it deepened the uncertainty that followed the Amarna period. He left no heirs. His tomb was rushed, his burial modest by royal standards, his name barely remembered in the official king lists. And yet, thousands of years later, it would be his name and his tomb that would define Egypt in the modern mind. Hidden in the Valley of the Kings, sealed and nearly forgotten, his burial escaped the looters who emptied so many others. And when it was discovered in 1922, it revealed a treasure untouched by time. Golden coffins, painted walls, chariots, statues, jewelry, and the now iconic death mask that seemed to stare into eternity. The world saw the face of a boy who ruled in silence and died in obscurity, and called him immortal. Tutankhamun's legacy is a strange one. He was not a great conqueror. He passed no laws of note. His reign was not marked by glory or catastrophe, and yet his life sits at the hinge of history, a symbol of restoration, a vessel for the ambitions of others, and in death, a figure more powerful than he ever was in life. His tomb speaks not of dominance, but of fragility. It is small, imperfect, hurried, but it endures, and in doing so, it offers a rare, unfiltered glimpse into the rituals, fears, and hopes of a civilization that built for eternity and yet vanished into the sand. The boy king may have ruled briefly, but the world will always remember his silence, his gold, and the eerie, accidental immortality carved into the mask he never lived long enough to see. The death of a pharaoh was not simply the end of a life. It was the breaking of a divine cycle, a moment when the order of the world trembled. And to restore that balance, the dead king could not travel into the afterlife alone. He needed company, loyal servants, trusted guardians, symbols of power, and tokens of wealth. But these were not merely painted on tomb walls or carved in stone. In the earliest dynasties, they were living beings, flesh and blood, chosen to follow their master into death. Retainer sacrifice was not myth. It was a chilling ritual that marked the royal burials of Egypt's distant past. Dozens, sometimes hundreds of people were killed and buried alongside the pharaoh. Their purpose was clear: to serve, protect, and obey in the next world just as they had in this one. It was a devotion demanded not by love, but by law and fear. Most of those sacrificed were young: servants, attendants, musicians, sometimes wives or favored concubines. They were given special roles, dressed in ceremonial garments, and placed in small chambers beside or near the king. Some were buried upright, others laid in rows. Their deaths were carefully timed, their positions precisely planned. Archaeologists have found evidence of strangulation, blunt force trauma, and the use of sedatives, all signs of organized execution. The process was not chaotic. It was sacred. And the society that practiced it did not see horror. They saw duty. To die with the pharaoh was to be chosen. To resist was unthinkable. Even animals were not spared. Dogs, monkeys, cattle, birds, all sacrificed, preserved, and entombed to recreate the comforts and symbols of royal life in the eternal realm. Hair was often clipped and buried. Nails, fragments of clothing, tools, bowls, even sand from the palace courtyard, all gathered and placed with care. The tomb was not just a grave. It was a replication of the palace, an idealized mirror of the world above, crafted for the god-king's eternal reign. And in that palace of the dead, no role could go unfilled. A scribe was buried to record the king's triumphs, a baker to prepare his meals, a guard to protect the gates. If the king had needed it in life, he would need it beyond death. And so the living were folded into the architecture of the afterlife, not symbolically, but physically. There was no escape, no final plea. The pharaoh's journey demanded a full court, and death was the price of his glory. Over time, the practice faded. By the Middle Kingdom, real human sacrifice gave way to symbolic substitutes, small statues called shabti, crafted to serve in the afterlife in place of living retainers. These figures, made of wood, stone, or faience, were inscribed with spells and commands. They were buried in the hundreds, sometimes thousands, surrounding the mummy like a silent army. It was progress, in a way. But the echo of earlier rituals remained. The memory of blood under gold, of servants who did not rise again. Modern eyes recoil from the cruelty, but for those who lived it, the sacrifice was part of the sacred rhythm. Death was not the end. It was a transformation. And if the pharaoh was to rise reborn, radiant in the field of reeds, he would not do so alone. He would carry with him the weight of those who had no choice, a kingdom sealed in silence beneath the stone. There was a time when Egypt did not merely revere its king. It feared him, adored him, and carved his name into stone so vast that even mountains seemed to bow. Ramses the Great was not just a pharaoh. He was a force of nature. Crowned young and reigning for over 6 decades, his presence filled the Nile Valley like the flood itself, inevitable, overwhelming, and utterly inescapable. He built not as a man builds, but as a god demands. Temples rose from rock, entire cities were renamed in his honor, and colossal statues bearing his face stared across the desert as if to remind the winds who truly ruled. He signed his name everywhere, even on monuments not his own. Every carving, every column, every sphinx whispered the same truth. Ramses lives, Ramses rules, Ramses is forever. And in his lifetime, few dared question it. His rule was not subtle. He fathered more than 100 children, claimed divine birth, and orchestrated ceremonies that merged politics, religion, and theater into one seamless vision of power. To approach him was to enter the presence of a living god. The boundaries between man and myth dissolved under the weight of ritual. Priests recited praises by torchlight. Gold draped his form, incense clouded his court, and those who entered bowed until their foreheads touched stone. But this grandeur was not hollow. Ramses was a builder of empires, a commander of armies, a negotiator who signed one of the earliest known peace treaties with the Hittites after the Battle of Kadesh. Though the battle itself was indecisive, he ensured that history, or at least the walls of his temples, painted it as a glorious victory. Truth mattered less than memory, and Ramses knew how to shape both. The temples of Abu Simbel remain his most audacious legacy, twin sanctuaries carved into the cliffs, their entrances flanked by towering statues of Ramses himself, each one over 60 feet tall. Inside, scenes of military triumph and divine adoration unfold in sequence, a storyboard of eternal kingship. Even the placement of the temple was precise. Twice a year, the rising sun would pierce the darkness and illuminate the inner chamber, lighting the statues of the gods, and Ramses seated among them. It was not enough to be king. He had to be eternal. His image multiplied endlessly, cast in stone and story, repeated until no one could separate fact from worship. And even now, thousands of years later, the magnitude of his self-glorification still echoes. Ramses did not merely live in history, he forced history to remember him. But behind the stone gaze and divine titles, there was still a man. Old age crept in. His children, so many of them, became ministers, rivals, shadows. The weight of his own myth pressed down, and yet he never allowed it to crack. He died in his 90s, a staggering age for any time, and when he did, the priests prepared him like no other. His mummified body was wrapped with care, his tomb filled with treasures, and his name still inscribed across a landscape that had grown used to his rule. Ramses the Great did not fear being forgotten. He ensured that forgetting was impossible. And in doing so, he left behind more than monuments. He left a lesson that in Egypt, divinity could be carved by will alone, and that terror and awe were merely two sides of the same crown. Death, in the world of the Pharaohs, was not an end but a beginning, an enterprise that demanded precision, resources, and an architecture of belief so elaborate it rivaled anything built for the living. A royal burial was not a simple farewell. It was a project that consumed decades, a logistical machine driven by fear of the unknown and obsession with eternity. The tomb itself was no mere hole in the rock. It was a kingdom in miniature, carved deep into the cliffs of the desert, hidden, sealed, guarded, and furnished with the kind of opulence that could bankrupt lesser nations. Corridors stretched like veins through the bedrock, branching into chambers filled with golden thrones, alabaster jars, carved boats, weapons, games, and jewelry. Every item chosen not for comfort, but for ritual function. This was no resting place. It was a staging ground for a pharaoh's transformation into a god. The process of preparing for this journey began long before death. Architects, artisans, and priests were summoned the moment a new king rose to the throne, if not before. Tombs were built in secret, often in remote valleys, their entrances masked to deter robbers who nonetheless always came. The walls of these tombs were painted in vivid color, coated in magical texts, and etched with prayers, maps, and warnings, designed not for visitors, but for the soul itself, to help it navigate the perilous afterlife. Every detail mattered. The ceiling might show the stars, the floor, rivers. The gods watched from every corner. And while these spaces were shaped in silence, above ground, the machinery of death began to stir. Goldsmiths hammered, sculptors carved, weavers dyed linen in preparation for a moment that could come suddenly or linger for decades. When the king finally died, the most sacred and grisly task began. The body was handed to embalmers, holy artisans who knew how to delay decay and guide the soul. The brain was removed through the nostrils. The organs, each one sacred, were extracted and stored in canopic jars. The heart, believed to be the seat of thought and morality, was treated with special care, though in some cases, curiously, it was missing altogether. The corpse was dried with natron salts for weeks, then wrapped layer upon layer in linen, with amulets and charms inserted between folds to protect against evil. The face was masked, the toes were bound, the hands crossed. This was not just preservation, it was transformation. The king had to be recognizable to the gods, but also reborn, not human, divine, eternal. The funeral itself was the final act in a sacred drama. Priests recited ancient spells. Women wailed and tore their clothes in choreographed grief. Offerings were burned. Animals sacrificed. Incense thickened the air until the desert sun itself seemed to dim. At the tomb's threshold, the opening of the mouth ceremony was performed. Tools touched to the mummy's face to restore its senses, so the dead could see, speak, eat, and breathe in the world beyond. Then came the sealing. The sarcophagus, massive and heavy, was lowered into place. Stone doors were closed, sand was packed, and silence returned. But even this was not the end. For years, priests returned with offerings. Rituals were maintained. Names were spoken, for memory was life. And all of it, the gold, the labor, the suffering, served one purpose: to ensure that the pharaoh did not merely die but continued, forever, untouched by rot or time, a sovereign even in the shadows. He walked among them, but he was not one of them. The pharaoh was not merely king, he was divine, a god clothed in human form, the living Horus on earth, the son of Ra, the eternal bridge between heaven and dust. His breath was sacred, his words infallible, his presence a walking miracle. No decree required approval, no gaze dared linger too long. Even his silence held the weight of law. This belief was not a matter of private faith. It was the architecture of Egypt's entire reality. The myth of the pharaoh's divinity was woven into every pillar, every harvest, every sunrise. To challenge him was not rebellion, it was blasphemy. And to serve him was not duty, it was salvation. Temples sang his name. Priests prayed to him as they once did to Osiris. And the people, from nobles to farmers, lived under the long golden shadow of his divine fiction. But this was not mere illusion. It was statecraft, refined through centuries. The pharaoh's godhood justified every action, every war, every tax. His victories were not military, they were cosmic, proof that Ma'at, the sacred order of the universe, still held. When the Nile flooded well, it was because the pharaoh was pleased. When it failed, it was the fault of hidden sin. He alone stood between the people and chaos. He alone could speak to the gods and be heard. Even the architecture bent to his divinity. Temples were laid out as cosmic maps, with the pharaoh at the center, the only one permitted to enter the holiest spaces, the only one pure enough to face the divine. Yet behind this grandeur lay human cunning. The priests, the scribes, the architects, they all participated in crafting the illusion, because their power was rooted in it. Ceremonies were endless. Festivals marked the pharaoh's birth, his coronation, his divine unions with goddesses, his renewal each year as a vessel of eternity. He was shown smiting enemies with supernatural force, offering food to gods who needed nothing, receiving blessings from deities sculpted to resemble himself. His image was not meant to flatter, it was meant to intimidate, to sanctify. Walls bore his profile by the thousand. His cartouche was etched deeper than others, so it would endure longer. And every repetition was a reminder. This was not a mortal with flaws or doubts. This was order incarnate. To look upon him was to glimpse the eternal. Even his mistakes, failed harvests, lost battles, were explained away, reinterpreted, or buried. History, after all, was written by those who built the tombs. And in those tombs, he was depicted not in frailty, but in triumph, always mid-stride, always ageless. Yet beneath the crown and the cobra, he bled like any man. He aged. He limped. He feared death. And still, the myth held. The people did not need him to be perfect. They needed him to be permanent. The machinery of godhood was too large to stop, too sacred to question. And so each pharaoh stepped into it like a costume that could never be removed. Even those who doubted, who hesitated, who trembled in the dark, they too were called divine. Because to rule Egypt was not to govern, it was to perform, to embody a cosmic role written in stone and sand. The pharaoh was a man, yes, but more than that, he was an idea, and ideas in Egypt could outlive even the desert. He was crowned not as a man, but as perfection itself. From the moment the golden crown touched his brow, the pharaoh was expected to be everything at once. A warrior without fear, a lover without flaw, a priest without sin, a judge without bias, and a ruler without weakness. He had to conquer enemies abroad, command obedience at home, appease the gods above, and seduce queens and concubines in private chambers, all while smiling with serene composure. The weight of the crown was not just ceremonial, it was suffocating. For to falter even once was to risk the unraveling of a kingdom. A wrong word in court, a failed omen, a rumor of illness, any of these could sow doubt, and doubt was poison. The pharaoh's image had to be unshakable. The people did not want to see a man. They wanted to see eternity. And yet, beneath the linen and gold, he was flesh. He grew tired. He grew old. His back ached from battles, or from merely sitting too long on thrones carved without mercy. He bore scars not from sacred rituals, but from childhood stumbles, political struggles, and family betrayal. At night, when the torches were lowered and the priestly voices faded, he could feel the solitude pressing in. His dreams were not visions. They were worries of rebellion, of infertility, of being forgotten. He might have loved one wife and merely tolerated the rest. He might have despised the obsequiousness of his court, or envied the peasant who could walk barefoot without protocol. But no such thoughts could be spoken aloud. He had to embody the nation, the gods, the past and future. His face had to remain serene while his world changed faster than any scribe could record. To serve as pharaoh was to suffocate in expectation and smile while doing so. Even when he failed, the system protected the myth. Historians would alter the records. Scribes would omit defeats. Sculptors would erase the lines of age or illness. A limp was redrawn as a stride. A missed battle was rewritten as a diplomatic triumph. And when illness struck, as it always did, the priests would declare it a holy transformation, a purging of mortal impurity. But none of this stopped the decay. Teeth rotted, bones fractured, eyes dimmed. The most divine of men still needed ointments and poultices, prayers and poisons. Some died young, crushed by their own legend. Others lingered long after their minds or bodies had failed, their courtiers whispering commands in their name. And yet, the illusion persisted. Even in death, the king was shown standing tall, armed and youthful, blessed by gods who seemed to ignore the reality of his remains. And still, Egypt endured, because the people did not worship the man. They worshipped what he represented. The pharaoh was not allowed to be human, because humanity was fragile. Instead, he became the symbol of order in a world teetering on chaos. And perhaps he believed it too. Perhaps he woke each morning and reminded himself of the role he played, not just as ruler, but as reassurance. His pain was hidden, his fear buried, his flaws edited. The cost of kingship was the loss of self, and yet the crown demanded it. For in Egypt, the pharaoh did not merely govern. He performed a miracle every day by pretending to be more than mortal and daring the world to believe it. The breath fades, and no one dares speak first. The great king, divine in name, eternal in promise, has died. But the air does not tremble. The sky does not split. The gods do not descend. Instead, there is only stillness. Courtiers avert their eyes. Priests step forward, already reciting the ancient rites. The transition begins, not of grief, but of transformation. The man who ruled as a god must now be made one. Death in Egypt was never the end. It was a ritual, a performance, an architecture of farewell built over decades. The body is carried away, wrapped in linen, anointed with oils, packed with amulets and spells. Every movement follows protocol. Every silence is rehearsed. In this choreography of death, there is no room for mourning. The king is not lost. He is ascending. But the man, the actual man, is already gone, and no one will speak of him again. He is now Osiris, lord of the underworld. His name is carved in stone, painted on walls, whispered in chambers filled with smoke. The mummy is laid in gold, the tomb sealed in silence. No one will see him again, but everyone will remember. That is the paradox. The physical self is hidden, entombed, reduced to bone and dust. But the name, the name, is made immortal. It appears on statues, on stelae, on the lips of those who never met him. History is edited before it's even told. Failures are omitted, awkward truths smoothed away. What remains is not a life, but a symbol. The pharaoh becomes a story, sculpted and cleaned, as eternal as the desert winds. His wives, his mistakes, his fears, none of these are recorded. The myth is cleaner. The myth is easier to worship. Years pass, decades, centuries. The tomb is forgotten or looted or swallowed by sand. The living move on, and new kings rise to take the same crown, speak the same oaths, repeat the same lies. But the old king remains in memory, now perfected. He becomes the golden mask, the granite statue, the impossible ideal. Children hear his name in lessons. Priests chant his victories as proof that Ma'at, the divine order, was once upheld. But no one speaks of how he limped. No one recalls the morning he wept behind the curtain. These details have no place in eternity. Egypt demands gods, not ghosts, so the pharaoh remains, not as he was, but as he had to be, flawless, divine, unforgettable. His image outlives his body outlasts his soul, and the soul, perhaps, never had a say in any of it. This is the final sleep of the living gods. Not rest, not peace, but absorption into story. The man vanishes, but the myth remains. He ruled a land of rituals and sand, of pyramids and prayers. He spoke with the voice of the sun and died with the silence of a man. His hands, once kissed by servants, now lie folded in stillness beneath layers of cloth and time. His name endures, not because he was loved, but because he was needed. Needed to make the people believe in order, in eternity, in something greater than death. But death came for him as it comes for all. And in the end, even a god sleeps, quietly, alone, entombed not just in stone, but in expectation. And so the sun sets over the painted walls and silent tombs. The gods fall quiet. The incense fades. The pharaoh sleeps, not as a king, not as a god, but as a story now too heavy to carry. Close your eyes. Let the sand cover everything. It always does.